My conversation with Nora Bateson was an inspirational exploration of what it means to be human, to commune, and to weave ideas together without trying to reach any final destination. Nora's writings in her two books, Small Arcs of Larger Circles and Combining, had already created new explorations in my life. I now see art differently, and I have a curiosity for it that just wasn't there before. And I now see different layers of relationships between education, my children, and what my role is as a parent in all of this. And most importantly, Nora, both in her writings and in our conversation, invited me to step outside, to move away from these fixed definitions of self and of the objects with which I interact with on a daily basis, and to just see the layers and layers of relationships that connect everything. As Nora says so profoundly, all of the UN Sustainable Development Goals are expressed in the simple act of a mother breastfeeding her child. Enjoy this episode of Think with my wonderful guest, Nora Bateson. Nora Bateson, welcome to Think.
Nice to be here.
So, Nora, you're an award winning filmmaker, writer, and educator, as well as president of the International Bateson Institute. Your work brings the fields of biology, cognition, art, anthropology, psychology, and information technology together into a study of the patterns in ecology of living systems. You've written two books, Small Arc of Larger Circles and Combining, which I hope everyone who's listening to this will go out and buy. They are important books to read. And your film, Ecology of Mind, is a portrait of your father, Gary Bateson. Now, in everything that you do, or so it seems to me from an outside perspective, at the core is the importance of looking at and understanding the relationships and interactions within and between systems. But before we dive into your thoughts and hopes, what would you like my listeners and viewers to know about yourself as we start our conversation today?
Well, that's always an interesting question. Um, I think it's fascinating to kind of look at what it is that we choose to edit out of our experience of life and then communicate as I want you to know this about me,
Hmm.
right? Because it's always a reductionism, it's always an edit. And so, what's that edit about? Am I trying to impress you? Am I trying to say something that will make me seem credible? Am I trying to be charming? Like, what is it that I would, pull out of this swirling world of complexity that is me in a world of complexity, etc., that would give you some information? And um, it's funny, when I do sessions, one of the things that I'm very careful of is to not encourage people to do introductions, because
Okay.
when they do it, unless now this isn't true for, I think, most more ancient cultures, indigenous cultures have a way of identifying themselves in relationship to land, in relationship to ancestors, in relationships that hold stories that are more than just one context of story. Like,
Hmm.
this is who I am in my professional world, or this is who I am in my personal world. There's an illusion in place there that you can actually separate those two.
Hmm.
Um, so I think it's fascinating. So I'm going to add that. That's my add.
It's a very fair point, and I start my interviews that way. I mean, to give people some context if they don't know the guest. But as you know, I for all my guests, I write something before and I send it over to the person so that they can learn a little bit about me and what I do write as well in there is like there's no red thread. Yeah, I mean, this may seem
I
like
love
a path,
that.
but there is no path. This is just some random things which I think about myself right now, which the person may like to know or not, right? But
Yeah.
there's so much more, and there's so much in the unsaid. of our lives, of the parts that we don't share or don't share much, which make up a lot of who we are. It never comes out either in interviews or even in documents that we send over to present ourselves to others.
I mean,
Uh,
it's interesting because one of the, I think, most painful experiences that as you know, as mammals, that we can experience is presuming we're in one kind of relationship and
mhm,
finding out it's not the relationship that we thought that we were in. And I think so much of that seems to happen around underestimation of the sort of habit of getting categorized and categorizing others. I am a, you know, even in my bio. And I'm not criticizing you. I'm actually just opening this up because I think it is part of the conversation, right? It's how do we actually hold each other and ourselves in the kind of realm of possibility, and also in the humility of recognizing, you know, I'm not sure I totally know who I am. This is I'm definitely different than I was yesterday, and I'm in a period, particularly right now of my life, where the sort of rearrangement of my existential world is quite significant. So, isn't that interesting? How do we make room for each other to be changing,
mm,
be very complex, to be, you know, different in different relationships, right? So how we are with one person is not like how we are with another, and that's not really about dishonesty.
mhm,
It's about paying attention, right? Who would you Wouldn't it be bizarre if you were just always the same? Then you would not be responding to the situations, the contexts that you were in.
mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if the social media. I mean, we're sort of surrounded by a context and conditions that want us to identify. You asked me before we started, so what are we going to talk about? And I said, well, I don't know.
I
I have no
appreciate
goal
that,
with
by
this channel. Yeah, I have no goal with this channel. I haven't thought about, and so many friends and people that I know, I mean, honestly and nicely, have asked me, okay, oh, Eric, great, you have a YouTube channel, podcast. Who's your target audience? What are you trying to achieve? What do you want? Business? Do you want this? Do you want? And I'm like, I don't know. I just want to have conversations. But generally, if I open my phone or if I go on the internet, a large percentage of what I'm confronted with is I have this identity. Do you identify with my identity,
exactly.
or are you different than my
Mm.
identity? What are our differences? So it becomes contextually, I find, harder to just say, well, I don't know. And to your point, I don't know who I am today. I don't know. Like, I went to the gym this morning. How am I feeling? What's in my mind? What am I feeling about the world today? Am I more courageous? Am I more vulnerable? Am I more? And that will have a huge impact on every interaction that I have throughout that day, and makes it hard to define myself as one specific thing, obviously.
And I guess there's a couple of things about this that I think are, you know, on the one hand, we could be accused right now of being, you know, kind of navel gazing and not having sort of the urgency of the world's issues
Hmm.
in in our our view. But I actually would like to address that because um, there is a way in which these categories and these identities and these various, you know, fix that question you just asked. You know, can you see who I am so you can see if you belong, if we belong together? Are we in the same group? Um, and the flip side of that is or not. And
Mhm.
so I think really one of the most dangerous things that we being the 8 billion human beings that are alive right now, are looking at is the way in which we are being divided from each other. And these categories and algorithms that produce these identities and splits, are actually, I would argue, more dangerous than, climate catastrophes, because there's absolutely no way we're going to be able to respond to the political, economic, technological, ecological crises, or meta crises, polycrises, um, if we can't be in communication and be with each other.
Hmm.
And that withness is not just, sort of know your neighbor, but can you learn together, right? And so that's a very different attitude,
Hmm.
um, of ways of being together, of recognizing, as in this era, with the kind of cultural, technological upheaval that every country, every culture is going through. I think it's pretty presumptuous for any of us to be so rigid about who we are or who others are. That seems like a radical and even violent reductionism. So this holding open of who am I when I'm with you? Who can you be when you're with me? Is for me an opening to an ecology of who we can be together. And that's an ecological idea. What's in a
Hmm.
relationship, as opposed to here's me, I am like this is how I am, this is how I fit into the system. And that's very mechanistic. That individualistic positioning is not about how we shift each other. It's this, responsibility placed on the individual. You need to be a better cog in the wheel. But
You need to add more value.
right, exactly. But there's no such thing as a better cog in the wheel.
Hmm. I mean, you said, or one of the many sentences that stuck out to me in your first book was that families are not functional or dysfunctional. And I connect that with what you're saying now in terms of being a cog in a wheel and being a functional cog in the wheel, or a person that adds value. What value do you add? Um, and so, what I wonder is, we have so I was thinking, and I wrote this down this morning. I was like, how do we start this conversation? And obviously, to me, there's no starting point. We're just entering. I'm entering a stream with you at some point, which was flowing before, which will be flowing afterwards. So it's not really a start to a conversation. Um, but I was trying to think. So the world that we live in today, and I'm just going to share my personal experience at the moment, is very unsettling. I'm a middle-aged 45-year-old man. I have twins. Now, I've said this in every discussion I've had, so everyone's going to know, but I have twins that are going to be 5 years old. Um, with everything that's going on in the world, socioeconomic, wars, polarization, I feel lost. I honestly feel lost. But I know, okay, it's a big word. Listening to you and reading your books and listening to others, to come here and talk about solutions doesn't make sense, because that's the whole thinking that got us here in the first place, that there was some finite solution to any problem which wasn't linked to a multitude of other things around us. So the image that came to my mind is that we've planted soil, we've cultivated it in a way that certain types of trees, certain systems have come out of it. And that's what's part of the reality in the systems that we're living today. How can we start to cultivate, change the soil, offer new possibilities for what may grow, so that, I mean, we can see things change in a way which is better for more people, which reduces this polarization, which um, allows us to take steps to reduce or change our relationship with the environment, which is a conversation I definitely want to have with you. Um, where are you at right now? I mean, with your experience and what you're doing, in terms of how can we start to cultivate a different type of soil and a different, all the bacteria that are in there and everything that's connected, so that we can grow different trees, and yeah, obviously meaning different types of systems which care more intrinsically in the systems that are going to come out of it.
Well, I think one thing is that it's, um, It's a consequence of having been categorized, and separated, that it's possible to not care.
Mm.
So, and I think this is kind of at the heart of colonialism. This is at the heart of industrialism. Uh, it's the heart of the whole concept of efficiency, that there is a sort of a built-in mandate of numbness. And you need to get in and get something done, and that means that you're going to rip that soil to shreds and churn up every earthworm and grind up every, and just metaphorically, but quite literally, you've got twins. I've got two kids that are in their late 20s now, and then I've also got a bunch of stepkids, and the youngest one is just finishing what I would call high school, what is called gymnasium in the European uh, way. And I find myself saying things like, um, "You just have to do this." And you just have to go to school, you just have to get good grades, you just have to do this because your future depends on you being able to get into a good university, and so you have to excel at the system. You have to become numb.
Hmm.
I hear myself say
Hmm.
this. The world is harsh, the systems are harsh, they don't care who you are or what you're feeling, so you have to not care either. You have to just go through it. And then in the same breath, I'm on podcasts like this, or,
Mhm.
in situations where again and again we're calling for some opening of the nuance, to sensitizing to this world that has been out of our perception realm because we desensitized to it, because we
Hmm.
had to, right? The second you learned that a tree was a tree, what got unlearned in that moment? What got erased?
Every relationship that connects to that tree, be it the soil, the worms, the rain, the quality of the air, everything.
The thousands of years in which all
Yeah.
these organisms came into relationship, and
Mhm.
will continue to do so in one way or another. So there's this um, hypocrisy,
Hmm.
right? Of recognizing, I'm gonna walk down the supermarket aisle and I'm gonna know that almost everything that I'm seeing there and identifying as some sort of food is actually produced in ways that are decreasing those relationships that make that tree, right? Whether
Hmm.
it's through the soil or whether it's through the human beings that are being exploited, or it's through the use of petroleum or the transportation or the way in which I and others and all of us have to, spend our days in what David Graeber called bullshit jobs, not spending time with our kids so that
Hmm.
we can go to the store and buy this box of something or other. And that that's where I really hear you when you just say, I feel like I don't know where I am or what to do, because it feels like it's all too big. And then there is something, and it's this recognition for me. Um, I have to back this up a little. I have to start by saying I grew up in California in the 70s, and I'm super sensitive to people bringing up, kind of shallow, off the shelf, 3-for-1 spirituality packages.
Okay.
Okay, so
Oh, California.
that's not my thing. I've seen too many jerks that have spent their lives meditating or have gone through the that, or level this or level that, It didn't make them nicer people. So what I want to say, though, is that life is sacred, and it's full of moments in which there are enormous openings for ecological change. And by that, I mean all the relationships in your life are moving, right? And you can feel really stuck. I have to go to work. You get in the daily grind. You get in this idea, this is who I am. This is where I live. This is who I live with. This is what I do. And you can feel like it's just this ongoing grind. But like it or not, life is full of these moments where everything changes. You fall in love. You have experienced the birth of your children.
Mm.
You have someone in your life who gets sick. You get sick. You get injured. You fall out of love. You have an idea that changes things. Someone comes into your life. You have a new relationship, a new friendship. You um you experience someone dying, and it shows you something about life. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So these moments where there are multiple relational shiftings that are possible are all the time. They happen all the time. And these are the moments when it's possible to put that notion of the sacred into play, and to there's a whole bunch of words that are the wrong word. To advocate for it, to claim it, to fight for it, to show up for it, but none of those are the right word.
Mm.
In some way, I think it's just recognizing that there's something much bigger possible than the thing you think you're looking at.
Mm.
And those are the moments. And they come all the time. So it's that sense of being stuck is also in contrast to the perpetual movement that actually is life and is life making more life. I don't know. I mean, let me give you an example. My mother recently died.
Oh,
And
my condolences.
thank you. And she was 95. She lived a beautiful life. There was nothing about this that was in any way tragic, other than that our time together in the way that I knew it was going to change. And I miss her. But she was in the hospital. She'd had a stroke. She was in the hospital, and the hospital, they were doing what they do, and bless them for doing it. But it was clear that she was dying, but she was registered as a stroke victim. So they kept trying to
Mm.
give her physiotherapy because that was what was on the chart. And I was like, look, she's dying. And she doesn't want to die in here. She wants to go home to die. Like, we want to take her home. Her whole family's there. I had made this beautiful room for her. Everything was prepared. We had the sippy cups, we had the lift, we had the Swedish system is incredible with their home care. They brought us a hospital bed. We had the beautiful bedding on it. The room, I mean, it was gorgeous. There were candles. People flew in. Her dear ones flew in from around the world. We were all here waiting. And day after day, they wouldn't send her home. And I had to rise to this occasion. I had to rise up into an intensity that was both respectful of where the hospitals were working, but also like, and now she needs to go home. And that intensity I could see afterward was not just about getting my mother home. It was about the way in which that action, which appears to be the action of getting her home, was an action that was actually about honoring the sacred process of death,
Mm.
not just for my mom, but for all of us that were here, in the way that, some, like my son's fiance, her grandparents had died alone. So they didn't have this. There was a lot of healing taking place in a lot of different directions through a lot of stories that had very little to do with the singular action of bringing my mother home. And yet, that singular action opened up this world of sacred possibility and experience. So that's what I'm talking about,
Hmm.
right? So there's a way in which these moments when ecologies change, when and every one of us who was here for her death, our lives were changed in every direction. We touched something eternal with her and with each other. And that is it changes how you eat, it changes how you walk, it changes how you speak to each other, it changes everything. It changes everything.
Hmm.
And so I think some of the work that I've been doing with warm data, people are always like, yeah, but what does it do? Like your conversations, what does it do? And I'm always finding myself saying, it doesn't do anything. It just does everything, right? You can't point to one thing and say, well, the reason we brought her home was because it's still rippling out.
Mm.
It's still moving. That what you learn about life and how it is to be alive from death is really quite profound.
Mm.
And it can be really jagged sometimes. People get ripped from this earth. They get ripped from you. There's ways in which people go and you haven't spoken to them. You had a rift. There's
Mm.
ways in which, she could have easily died in that hospital bed. And I would have had to have made that be beautiful too. Let that be beautiful. Let it be profound. Bring the learning in. But there's something about recognizing those moments when they come and being willing to learn with them, opening the possibilities when they arrive. Because a lot of the time, they're not there. You got to just do the thing and do the thing and do the thing. Um, but they come along.
Thanks so much for sharing. Yeah, so many things came to mind. My own experience of when I was young and losing friends. I was like 17, and very close friend of mine. She was hit by a car, unfortunately, and died. It changed. Those moments they don't always do, or they always change you. But there's a multitude of possible avenues through which you will change. And actually, you often change on multiple avenues at the same time through those events. And sometimes you only recognize 20 years later when you're in a relationship that, I've been doing this since that happened 20 years ago, because that was one of the ways that those events or that event changed me. But one thing that changed and that stayed was that ever since then, every conversation that I've had with my parents, we always finish with "I love you." Every single conversation. The experience of losing someone that was close to me at an age where the world was only possibilities, was only adventures, and for my parents to see other parents lose a child, that was something that changed and stayed with us forever. My father passed away in 2016 at the age of 86. Good life. My mother's still alive, and we still end our conversations, every conversation today, saying "I love you," because yeah, that was one moment which, um, at least, just showed us that you never know. One little decision which had no negative intentions. Instead of crossing at the crosswalk, she crossed behind, and she was on rollerblades, and she was behind a lamppost, and so she could only see the light across the street. And when she saw it turn green, she hadn't seen that there was a car that was going on yellow/red. Little, what seems like a minor decision, and that was one of the things that changed, in my relationship with my family, but then in my relationship with everyone. Oh, and so much more, obviously, came to mind. Do I have many stupid questions? So that's part of the beauty of having these conversations. Um, I mean, these moments come whenever they come, if they come. We need these moments to come individually, in our communities, in the world, right? We need sort of those moments where the sacredness of life is felt. And when you said, you couldn't find, or there's no right word to describe it, what came to mind was music. With music, it's like you get on something which is already there. And yeah, you're are you expressing it? Is it expressing you? I mean, sometimes you just put music on and just something happens, and your whole day and your whole perception of the trees and the lighting and the faces of other people changes. And so that's what came to mind when you have those experiences of the sacredness of life. What can happen is you just get taken away by it, and it colors everything around you. um this is my stupid question. Do we just have to wait for everyone to, have experiences which are open up those possibilities? Do we share our own? And I work in corporate life, where I try to bring some of your ideas and the ideas of others, that it's not all mechanistic, and let's not divide everything into the smallest parts and try to make those perfect. And and it lands very rarely, I must say. Unfortunately, it lands sometimes. So do we just have to wait? Is it just a game of conditions and
I mean,
possibilities?
one thing that I have seen 1,000 times is that whenever someone tells a story from their life,
Hmm.
whatever it is, as long as it's not you know, a story about how they made a big success at work, because that doesn't really qualify. But a personal story, right? Even it's like how I had my breakfast. Like, really, it doesn't have to be significant. It can be seemingly very banal. But when you tell a story from your personal life, in that story, there is an integration of all the contexts that we live within: family, culture, technology, economy, politics, science, ecology, um, and so on, identity, health, in anything. They're all there. So we actually live in a world that is totally integrating the complexity that we are needing to sensitize to. We are already there. Somehow, our communication is patterned into habits and expectations of extracted reductive descriptions of these already integrated complexities. Now, what's weird is when you take the extraction and then you translate that back into the language of complexity theory. And actually, it was already fine. So I think that is another way of saying that even the most minute and banal moments of the day are non-trivial. And within them is, like in the grain of the wood, in your fingerprint, there's the logic of how you are living your life. Now, when I say logic, you might be thinking let's think of it as a coherent aesthetic. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like as a filmmaker, when you make a set or you create a costume, it has to everything is speaking to each other, right? So the teacup
Yeah.
and the dress and the color of the wallpaper and the lighting and the light fixtures and the sofas and the frames and the everything is creating a set of meanings, right? So in every moment you are doing that. Uh, so somehow that to me is also an expression that could always be something sacred, something about life. And how easy it is, and we all do it, to slide into, I'm in a rush, I got to be there by 2, I've got to, get the thing packaged in the mail, I've got to, da, da, da. And it's easy to be in a world in which the profound integrating processes are obscured, but they're still there. It's like the sky, right? It's there. If you don't look up, you might not see it, but it's there. So I think that's where, I guess, if you want me to say what I think is possible, or where there's
Yeah.
looseness, where there's what people call hope, it's in the thing that's always been there.
Mm.
And the fact is that even looking at the dreaded and horrific possibilities of, technological AI authoritarianism, and, watching things grow in very strange ways in terms of, um, the way people are looking at each other as the
Mm.
enemy. Um, People have tried this before.
Hmm.
Authoritarianism doesn't work because people have babies, they fall in love, they get sick, they die, they change their minds, they wiggle, they shift, life doesn't conform
Hmm.
to those kind of controls. So it never you can do a lot of damage, though, and create a lot of trauma that lasts a long time, that works its way into everything.
And comes back and
Yeah,
creates more.
right. So, um, but there is always, the incredible music that
Mm.
was written from inside the concentration camps. The ability for for people to be creative is, you can't make it go away. It's even in the worst of circumstances. Um, and I isn't it interesting that we have to have this conversation right now? Like, to me, it's telling that these are the these are the backstops of what we're looking at right now.
Yeah.
And um, yeah, I'm really concerned. I'm really concerned. I'm concerned for my kids. I'm concerned for not just the human species, but all these other organisms, um, that make life with us. So I'm very concerned, and I don't ever want to make light of it, or to say, and here's a simple solution. So I think for me, that's the most frustrating thing that I hear people try to do, is to
Mm.
create some sort of a meme, or a key to go in the lock to unlock the problem, or a model to implement, or you cannot implement a top down model on people who won't even speak to each other. You can't create the kind of collaboration that these times ask of us unless people can actually commune with each other. And what that is, coming back to the beginning of our conversation, is this recognition that there's a lot more to you than I will ever know. And there's more to me than you will know. That frankly, there's more to either of us than we will know. So that is an opening, right? It's a way of giving dignity and recognizing in that same moment that the way we are showing up in this moment together isn't just about you and me. We're carrying all kinds of stories and configurations and limitations and ways in which we can't perceive and ways in which we're hypersensitive to other perceptions and ways in which we've been bruised and damaged and um
Repaired and
yeah.
not repaired and
So it's even, with my husband or with my kids, recognizing, okay, so we're in a little bit of a hot spot. And that one thing of saying, well, but who's here in this hot spot? Who's here? Is it you and me? How many ancestral cultural versions of harm doing are we carrying in our interaction? And even just asking that question makes it so much more possible
Mm.
to say, okay, so some of this is not ours. Um,
Yeah, a lot of it. Well,
yeah, a lot of it has nothing to do that. There's that saying, the fathers have eaten from the bitter fruit, and the children's teeth are on edge.
mm,
But they don't know why. There's a lot of ways in which we are defensive or hurt, and we weren't there for the context of how things went so wrong. And then just add like the whole world of colonial violence to that, and it's and the numbness. I mean, think about, as somebody who walks in white skin, how much numbness has been passed down, how the tools to not feel the harm passed
absolutely.
down.
I think for me, until recently, I was oblivious to that within myself.
Mm,
Not for any other like not intentionally, obviously. Um, but yeah, first, as a middle-aged white man, as a white man, I walk through the world, and the world walks through me completely differently, and I was oblivious to that. And my own joy and possibilities, and it doesn't take away from those experiences. I wasn't intentionally harming anyone,
mm,
but until recently, like on whose labor, on whose sweat and blood and death was my comfort built. And the first conversation that I had for my channel was with Dori Tunstall.
mm,
Who, I don't know if you know her, but she wrote a book called Decolonizing Design,
mhm,
and was the first Black dean of a design university anywhere. And she advocates a lot for Aboriginals and Aborigine. I'm Canadian. I live in Germany. I'm Canadian.
mhm.
So, in preparing for my conversation with her, I dug into my own family a little bit. Yeah, and okay, there's obviously I'm French Canadian mix, but so there is a colonial background in there. But reading her book and doing that research, you start to see things that you never saw before. Um,
Yeah,
and now that was the beginning of feeling lost in certain ways. But I guess it's an important starting point for many of us. It's better to be lost than to have a certainty about things that which one has not looked into.
yeah. It's better to be lost, but uncomfortable, and it makes people jittery and nervous and lash out. And I think we're seeing that all around the world right now. I'm thinking also about. I mean, on my father's side, I can really look back and I can see multiple generations of people who were fighting. Um, I have an interview tonight with this guy, Donald Forstyke, who wrote a book called Treasure Your Exceptions, which is a book about my grandfather, William Bateson, and the way in which he, as a biologist, he coined the term genetics. And in I think 1910 or 13 or some, right, early, he was saying there is absolutely nothing in the genetics that show that people who have different skin tones or come from different cultures are in any way less than each other. Now, this was a paper, you better believe, that got squelched, right? But there it is. And he fought for that. And to his own demise, of course. But still, I mean, I have a penchant for detective stories. So that's my guilty pleasure. And I always imagine what it would be like if there was one of those, those lights that show where the murder happened, where the blood
Hmm.
is. What if you had one of those and you just ran it through your house?
Oh yeah.
And
On your clothes, your furniture,
I
your
mean, ev-
everything, your electricity.
everything. And so, and I think this is why people are, it's hard to hold the sensitivity to that and get up in the morning, right? There's a way in which there's got to be some morale.
Mm.
And by morale, I really mean that fire of, okay, I know it's this bad. And life is still beautiful. It's still sacred. And I must be there and give what I can to that sacred process. And so I think that's what I'm kind of trying to get at with that story about
Mm.
the hospital, that thing.
Yeah.
And whether it's that or, showing up for your kid that's having trouble in math, and how you do that in a way that recognizes first and foremost life is sacred. Now,
Mm.
how are we going to deal with this institutional issue? Right? Which is a very different thing than we have to fulfill the institutional issue and just, steamrolling the sacred in the
Mm.
process of trying to solve an institutional problem. But starting from that other place of let's begin with it, that we are each, everyone is holding something absolutely sacred. Now, how do we do what we need to do? How would we approach it differently? How do you approach a situation that is an institutional double bind differently when you're starting from the idea that there is something truly non-trivial to tend?
Say more about double binds and institutional double binds for people who are listening.
Mm.
I think that's a really, really important concept, because an experience, once you think about it, I think it's no longer just in your thoughts. You can experience viscerally what a double bind is and feels like.
Mhm, mhm. So a double bind is when you get caught in more than one context. And that makes it sound easy. But the very nature of double binds is that they are excruciating. Um, so it's a theory that was developed um, by my dad and some colleagues in the 50s. Um, that's partially true. That's the way the history books read. It's not entirely true. I think it actually started far before then with a woman that he was working with named Maya Deren. But they didn't publish it. Therefore, that's not the beginning. Okay. And there's a stupid culture, right? So there's a double bind in the double bind, which is that you can't even say where it started. So the nature of a double bind is that if you try to solve one part of the problem, you end up creating another one. Um, so if the easy one is this: you're in a relationship with someone and they say to you, or maybe it's you that says to them, "You never tell me that you love me." All right. Now, that's a problem because you cannot at that point say, "Oh, but I do." Because the only reason you're saying that is that you were told to say it, which doesn't really satisfy the feeling of having someone not tell you that they love you. That's not really the thing they are after. But if you don't say it, they were right. So
Hmm.
you're caught, right? And you can't say that's a trick question because that is not a welcome response in that moment either. So so that's an example, but there's examples everywhere. I mean, the biggest one, of course, is the fact that we have to participate in all sorts of systems. I mean, you have to pay your electric, you have to, take transportation, you have to get food, you have to participate in all kinds of systems that are destroying the future of not just our species, but others, and, colluding in all sorts of exploitation um, to get to next week. Um, and if you don't, you can't get to next week. So if you do it, you're creating destruction. And if you don't, you will be destroyed. You
Hmm.
will die, right? So it's a double bind.
Uh,
And there's double binds everywhere, right? I think we were talking a minute ago about the double bind of parenthood in this moment, of having to say to your kid, you really need to succeed in the existing system. And they are looking at you like, yeah, but if I succeed in the existing system, what am I going to do? And if you don't, you won't be able to be part of the culture. But if you do, you're not going to be prepared to be in a different culture, one which
yeah.
we don't know yet, right? So these are the double binds, and very often they are so distracting
Hmm.
that it's difficult to perceive other contextual responses. And by that, I mean things that come from another direction, things that don't appear to have anything to do with what the double bind is. So, in the "you never tell me you love me," it might be that you end up telling a story about your own childhood and the way
Hmm.
that affection was doled out.
Hmm.
Okay, now that is not what she's asking for or he's asking for. That's not what your partner is asking for. But that context may bring in something else, right? In the example of being a parent, I had the interesting experience recently with my stepson and his math grades, and um, what he ended up doing was actually spending a weekend with my mother shortly before she died and perceiving life in a really different way. Now, that is not a direct corrective to the problem of either passing math and, being part of a system that's going nowhere good, or not passing math and therefore being excluded or ostracized by the existing system. Instead, he learned something about life that showed him this math situation in a different way, and he passed.
Hmm.
So it's this question of how do you hold um, these predicaments, because we are like basically a double bind is very much like an addiction, right? If you're in an addiction of any sort, whether it's a substance addiction or a behavioral addiction or a societal cultural addiction, um, there's a way in which there's an impossibility to imagine life without this thing,
Hmm.
right? There's that famous saying of it's easier to imagine the end of humankind and life on earth than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. That shows you that there's an addiction. right? It's easier to um, imagine how to have a way to get around our situation than it is to imagine changing. And these ways, these impossible possibles, and they're sitting right there. They're sitting right there, but you can't see them because the predicament, the double bind, is so loud. It's so painful and so distracting.
I was wondering if it was a double bind when we say we need to consume less, but then if we think about it, it's like, okay, I need to consume less of everyone else's products, but whatever I do, I don't know, consulting or I sell, people still need to consume mine because, or else, yeah, I won't have money to support my family and to pay my electricity bills. So there, yeah, there are a lot of those situations, and then we feel, or then maybe the numbness kicks in, and we just, yeah, we don't spend more time thinking about them, and maybe we're then close to also the oblique or the other ways that and things that can enter that could give freshness is the wrong word, right? I mean, an example of your stepson um, had nothing to do with math.
Right. That's the thing. The responses to the double bind, not sometimes, always look nothing like the bind.
Hmm.
So we're desperately trying to make first order correctives. Here's the
Yeah,
situation. Someone doesn't think I love them. I need to solve that problem.
yeah,
And then that becomes very, this is very industrial thinking. This is how you fix a machine. But this is not how life works. And so the response to that comes from somewhere else entirely, and you can't I can't even give you instructions on how to do it because it's completely contextual.
yeah.
The response to my stepson's math problem was my mother, but that's because that's what was happening in our context. That's
Hmm.
not what's happening in your context, so it's not a packageable solution that I could just say, okay, and here's the methodology for this. um yeah.
For that, we have to, again, I mean, stupid, but we have to accept that life is not a packageable thing to start off with, right? We are raised. I mean, you talk about it in your book how we've decontextualized education into economics and math and health and all that, whereas health is all that, oops, all that and
Mm.
more,
Mhm.
right? So we, to come back to starting with the sacredness of life as the starting point and then seeing what comes next. The image that came to mind was people listening to our conversation and nodding, going, "Yeah, yeah, absolutely." And then very caricature, the doors of their company opens and they walk through the door, and that sacredness check done. Stayed outside, right? Yeah, I did it. I did that sacredness. I looked at the trees and then I breathed the air. Doors closed and say, okay, I need to create value. Fire 5 people today, and like the sacredness doesn't roll
Mm.
if it doesn't roll forward, if it doesn't permeate color. And by the way, thank you for giving me an interest in art, which I had never had before in my life. So thank you for that. And my kids will one day thank you for that as well. Thanks to your explanation of transcontextualism and
Mm.
art. That I, yeah, it's a complete other tangent, but I did want to say thank you for that. But it's like if that sacredness of life is coloring every context, every step, even in just a minute
Mm.
way, right? Then there's possibly more openness to not dividing things and not separating things and not trying to find the solution for things and not in being comfortable in the double bind and the discomfort and say, okay, there's no fixed solution to this. Let me just go about my day, let me just go about my week, let me just see what, and leave that possibility, that openness for something other and else.
I think it brings me to back to your story about learning all that you were oblivious to in your
Mm,
world of privilege, and recognizing how much learning is possible. And so I think there's something about the mutual learning that's taking place in every moment that you can either nourish and celebrate and pay attention to, and sensitize yourself to watching out for it, or or not. And so there's the possibility of there being a lot of learning that happens all day, every day. And for me, I actually find that when there's not that learning, I burn out. That's when something becomes rote, it becomes boring, it becomes a drudgery. When I'm actually i- learning, when I'm noticing I'm with this person, what can, maybe I don't agree with them on 90% of what they say, but what can I learn from them?
mm.
What do I learn about me? What do I learn about them? What do I learn about life? That it changes how I am in relationship to them. It changes how I listen. All right. So you can say it's important to listen, but if you're just sitting there rehearsing what you're going to say next, or passing silent judgment, that's not the same kind of listening as listening to learn. What can I learn about how I might be in relationship with this person? So I think that that learning is it's like circulation. It brings oxygen, it brings ongoing movement. It's allowing things to move. That I guess again and again what I'm hearing is everything is stuck. We're stuck in this system that we don't know how to change. And I think the slightest shift in how you even perceive the day and your body and your family actually changes everything. And so the big systems that seem so monstrous, um, you would be surprised how things can change if the people who are in them start to see them in another way.
Yeah, learning. You said something in your book, and it connects to learning. It connects to education, but it also connects to the situation that we find ourselves in at the moment. And I promised a friend of mine that I would ask you this question because I started I do that. I don't know if other people do that, but I listen to people and I'm like, then I go and talk to friends. I'm like, oh no, we have to look at this way and that way. And they're like, yeah, Eric, what about this and that? I'm like, no answer to those questions because I only listened to Nora or to this person, and it made sense to me, but I didn't get that far in my reasoning um, and so we got to the conversation, and I'm going to paraphrase here from your first book, and let me know if it needs to be corrected. But basically, when we assign monetary values to things, we don't do very good with those things as a human species. So assigning a monetary value to the environment and to carbon, probably not a good idea. And what I remember from your book and paraphrase, right, is there's one thing that we haven't put a monetary value on, and that's the relationship between a mother and her child.
Mm.
We can talk about different breakfasts and what's good and these kinds of things. But luckily, that fundamental relationship does not have a monetary value which we can exchange, which we can bid on, um, because it's just fundamental to life. And so is the relationship with, well, it's not even relation. So is nature and us and that whole thing. So putting a monetary value on it, it's not a good idea. And he worked in sort of positive, a net positive investment and all that. And it's like, okay, Eric, well, so what's the solution then? Well, I said, well, I'm not saying there is one solution, but education in the terms of how we grow up understanding that relationship, living it, learning about it. And he's like, yeah, but that's going to take too long. Shouldn't we still do the carbon pricing and taxing and everything and do that at the same time? And I'm like, I don't know, because I didn't get that far into my reasoning around it. In a sense, is it intrinsically, well, intrinsically, is it? I mean, I thought this morning about other times where we may have done that, and once that boat has, left the shore and it moves forward, it's really hard to say, okay, we don't need that anymore. We can stop that because now we've educated ourselves, or the education is going to take over. So in this mutual learning, right, and in this now the changes that need to, the shifts that need to happen, and the current um, methodologies or frameworks and the things that we tend to apply, do they move together across this? Do we shoot ourselves in the foot again by saying, well, okay, let's deal with this one, takes too long, so let's start with the short term, this should fix it, but we're supposedly going to do the other one at the same time? What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think you laid it out pretty nicely. So, I if I were gonna make investments, I would look at that relationship, and I think this is in combining. If you look at the image of a mother nursing her baby, okay, and you ask yourself, "What do I do to support that?" Okay, because in there is every single sustainable development goal. All right. Every single one is there because in order for a mother to be able to feed her baby, which is, by the way, the premise of continuing our mammalian existence, mammals have to feed their babies. That's it. That's all. So if you look at that image, in that image, you will see in order for a mother to nurse her baby, she has to be able to eat. The food that she eats needs to come from soil that has nutrients. She has to be able to have water. She has to be able to be in relationship with her community in a way that she is supported. And the people who make her clothes or grow her food need to be able to feed their babies. And their babies need to be able to feed their babies, which means that the air needs to be clean and the soil needs to be there in generations to come. And the way in which the other parent and the other community are in relationship needs to be held in education, in dignity, in in all sorts of it. So basically you have every single sustainable development goal there. So, but it's not at first order. Okay, so this is the difference. If you look at that image and you say, what can we do to support the relationships that support these relationships, that support these
Mm.
relationships? All right, that is not a single item committee. It's not even a triple item committee. All right, that is a way of looking at something sacred is happening here. How do we support this? Because the way in which, for example, the most of the time the sustainable development goals are depicted as these boxes of colored things,
Mm-hmm.
and each one is different. And when you separate them, guess what happens? They become obscured. All right. And that thing, just like when you tell a story from your life, all the contexts are there. In the moment that you are with a mother who is nursing their child, even if you don't have children, this is ongoing continuance of life. Everyone's part of this.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about how big your apartment is or how flashy your car is or whether or not you have a electric Tesla or you have a old pickup. In the end, it's about how do you support the relationships that make life. So if you pull them apart from each other, then you're back in the same thinking that created the problem to begin with.
Which we see organizations say we're doing these three
Right.
SDGs out of the 11 or 14, however many, right, there
And they
are.
want to measure the outcome. They want to, and the
Yes.
second you do that, you also are obscuring the actual systemic process, because the systemic process is not going to be measurable. It's not going to stop. You can't measure how much nonverbal communication is happening between a mother and child. You can't measure it. You can't measure what's happening in the community or with the other siblings, or how the whole experience of being in the world is changed by actually you have babies, by witnessing this process. And especially if the process is held with love and with dignity, and so that's something really different than thinking we have to do carbon offset.
I have, again, I'm sure, well, a utopian dream, but um, I want and wish that organizations transparently have that conversation.
Mhm.
That companies just say, look, don't have all the answers. We don't. But we're looking as many layers as we can
Yeah.
that we know of. And once we find out about more, we'll look at those two. And then we'll find out about more and we'll look at those two. But these are the ones we know about. And we know we're not going to get it perfect, but we're going to keep telling you what we're figuring out and what we're improving and or changing or what the impacts are. We thought it would do this. Oh, nope, did something completely different. And now we have to deal with that and figure out, yeah, what are the next steps. Um, on my LinkedIn profile for a while, I was posting on about how this separation between business and sort of society just doesn't make sense to me. They don't live, you know. It doesn't matter if someone is legally accountable for it or not. The consequences are going to be there for generations to come. It doesn't even matter if they go to jail for 8 months or 2 years or 5 years, right? These things are not separate. And I hope through what you do and warm data that leaders are being attracted to coming to have at least a conversation and a reflection, even if the space may not be there yet for them to bring that as much as they would like to into their businesses. I hope that's happening.
I hope so too. But whether or not it is, I'm going to keep trying. So, um, I think that's all I got. That's all I can do. If I'm trying to take measure of the worthwhileness of this, I could find myself really demoralized.
Hmm.
Um, and that coming back to the importance of morale, there's something, there's something that is it's an epic thing. It's in all the sagas, right? It's the thing of you just keep going. You just keep showing up for all that is good in the world, for all that is possible
Hmm.
that you haven't even imagined yet, for all the music that hasn't been written, for all the lovers that haven't met, for all the forests that are still to come, in hundreds and hundreds of years from now. And that's an act of actual rebellion. Um, I'm an 80s girl, so I have a little punk rock left in me yet. And lately I've been just loving the dandelions. Have you seen the dandelions this year? They are
Yes.
outrageous, and I feel like that's my totem right now. You know, go ahead, mow them down, cover them in chemicals, do what you want. The dandelions, they keep coming back. They keep making the meadow possible. They keep there. So, and then there's moments when I just have to crawl in bed and put my head under the covers and just say, I just need an hour to just not. But then I get back up.
I wanted to say that, yeah, luckily in all of these epics, there are moments where the protagonist needs someone to contain them while they're
Mm.
like, this is never going to work.
Yeah. I get up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for those moments, and luckily, I mean, having supportive friends or family,
Mm.
or in this case, I'm lucky I get to come into these conversations and get contained and supported by people like yourself and others. Um, but that's also important, right? To just some days and some moments to allow ourselves to have that experience of, yeah, no, I have no idea. What have I been doing for the last 25, 40 years? What's coming next? This doesn't make any sense. And for that 1 hour, 1 day, 2 days, whatever it is, and then, but to be, hopefully, be supported through that. And then for our perspective to shift again within us, and for that fire to be there.
And that's where, I want the people who are thinking carbon tickets would be a good idea to be putting their support where people are actually really wanting to make change. And are they going to fail? Yes, they're going to fail. Are they going to get stupid ideas that go nowhere? Thank goodness they will. They don't need to have ideas that are, fleshed out and proven and statistically, you know, upheld. They need to be doing things that are uncanny and impossible
Hmm.
and, unthought of, and that and doing it together and trying things out and being supported for that aspect of being human together, where we don't know what we're doing, but we're going to try. And things have been so cynically, I mean, the world is increasingly like a Kafka novel, where I was just trying to do a thing last night and I got caught in this AI chat that was like, I just I don't want to chat with an AI bot. I don't want this in my health. I don't want this.
Mm.
I want to be in analog mutual learning with my fellow organisms that are here, and be able to try things. And there's enough support out there that should be possible. I mean, it should be possible. It shouldn't be unrealistic that that people are forced to only see realism within the confines of the existing system. How do we get out if we can't get disoriented from it? And the disorientation itself is probably the most precious thing we have.
I'm sitting in it. I'm sitting in it right these days, definitely.
Yeah, yeah, and
And it's important to sit in it because shifts can happen then.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, I mean, my wife and I, so I'm Canadian. My wife is Russian. We live in Germany. I lived here 7 years now. I've lived here a total of 13 years. You're talking about like analog relationships. Um, Most of my connections, okay, I have friends here, but my connections are all over the
Hmm.
world.
Yeah,
I know less about most of my neighbors in my neighborhood. And so it makes it, how do you commute then? Right? Like, how do you, and we're moving a couple weeks. So on that side of the camera is boxes and a Kanban board of everything we need to do to move. But we're moving actually into the countryside. Um, a really small village, but we're going to be 5, 6 minutes away from a lake and forests. And the goal is for ourselves and our kids to spend as much time outdoors as we can. We notice as parents that when we're outdoors, we're more relaxed.
Mm,
We're like, as long as you don't kill yourself, go do this, do that, try whatever. You're not at home, like in the sense you're
mm,
outdoors, and we notice that when we're more relaxed, of course, the kids are more relaxed. And I'm privileged to have a wife who grew up in a village where they pick mushrooms, they cook them. So she still does that, and I grew up in a suburb in Canada. Um, so it's about changing sort of our surroundings and our relationships. But one of the goals is also to commune, to get to know our
mm.
neighbors, to be where we are in Germany, to be here, and to um, get to know more of our neighbors and to have conversations with them. And we're probably going to be the only foreigners, I would imagine, or not that many in that area, and lead into maybe some conversations around, yeah, foreigners and immigration, and but face to face in a context, in a possibility where you can give stories about where you come from, and all of that. um and I wonder how much, I mean, the fact that I met a Russian woman in Spain, and my brother's married to a Brazilian woman who he met white water rafting down the Namibia River in Africa. Beautiful that these connections come.
Mhm.
But the local, the community, if we don't have that anymore, I just feel there's a big risk that it will be extremely difficult for those analog relationships and for those mutual learnings and for those patterns of polarization. It'll be much more difficult for them to be woven into something new if we're not communing locally
Yeah.
in some ways.
And to recognize that, I mean, I am living in Sweden, and I'm clearly not Swedish. So I have a little bit of the same thing of I'm not of this place, and place is really important. And also with the Atlantic meridian circulation changing, um, I find it really outrageous that there isn't more discussion right now around how are we going to do people movement better, right? Not how do we stop it, because you can't stop it. You can build a wall, but you can't stop this. There's too much political, ecological change happening now. And if people need to move so that their children can survive, they will do it. And if the AMOC stops, a good deal of Europe, Scandinavia, and the east coast of the United States is going to be thinking about how do we go somewhere else.
Mm,
It's too cold now. And so, this question of how do we together recognize we are in a time of change,
mm,
and I cannot expect the people that I am with to be terribly stable, whatever the hell that means, to be able to hold the cultural complexity that we are in together. No way. We don't know how to do that. To know what the right thing to do is. I don't know what the right thing to do is. To have some, hypersensitivity to where I'm coming from. Nope, that's not going to happen. So, there's all of these ways in which I feel that there's a lot of, kind of overarching meta communication that is necessary around, okay, now we go together into
mm,
the tumble cycle of the washing machine. And how can we do this together? And it's not really about who's got the money or who has the, I mean, in a sense, it really just comes down to mutual learning. Can we do
Hmm.
this together? Can we go where we don't know where we're going together? And what are the skills? What are the ways in which you would, I think there's a piece in combining um, called How Do You Pack? And I'll read it to you. Let's see. I've got it here. Let's see. How do you pack? How do you pack? I do not long for how things were before, nor do I long for some fabricated future utopia. I do not long for things or money or status. I do not long for more time or even for fixing the broken corners of my heart. I feel the upending of so much that has needed to be upended for so long, but I do not long for the chaos. It comes like a fever to a sick body. I do not know what a healthy system would be like. I do not know how to long for it. How do you pack when you have no idea where you're going?
Yep. No answer to that, right? How do you pack?
And you don't have to answer. It's just that question.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I don't know how to pack because I don't know where we're going.
Hmm. Well, we're all going
But we're
together,
going, and
and
it's not going to be
yeah,
easy. So
yeah.
let's just keep that in mind.
So let me just pack what I think we need. You pack what you think we need, and as long as we are in that mutual relationship, then if we find out that it's what you packed and a bit of what I packed and that person packed, then yeah, if we're in that mutual relationship, at least
We
whatever on that journey, we have a chance to use those things or to collaborate to try and make the best out of it. But
find,
we need those relationships.
yeah, we'll figure it out.
So I'm aware of time.
Mm.
Yeah, I know it's very important. Yeah, everyone has schedules and things to do. There are two questions that I always like to ask my guests on in closing. Um, One of them is probably a bit of a loaded question, but I'll have a go at it
All
anyways.
right.
In a sense, what do you think? What could we do as humans to build to be kinder, more compassionate, and more just?
Well, I think those things all come out in different contexts in different ways. So it's a tricky question because for some people, kindness looks like soft warmth. For other people, and in other moments, in other contexts, the kindest thing you can do is actually stop something.
Hmm.
Um, you know, justice for some people looks like the legal system. For other people, it looks like another thing altogether. So it depends on, what is happening. And but I think in as a sort of overarching response, I would say that for me, the response to all of those questions is the same. It's the recognition that things are a lot more complex than what you're seeing, and that they started a long time ago and they keep going in lots of directions that are unforeseen, and to just go forward knowing that the things that you do, each doing, doesn't stop at the thing that got done. It keeps going. So what is not necessarily important is what is the thing that got done, but what does it lead to? What possibilities does it open or close?
Hmm. Well, thank you for that. My next question is quite easy. Well, easy. It's as in my interest in learning more about how we think, the way we think as human beings. Is there anyone you think I should talk to? I should have a conversation with?
Ah, I mean, of course.
I'm sure there
So
are
many
many, but
people.
yeah.
Um, well, there's the poet Worcestershire. There's the author and activist Arundhati Roy. There's the people who are in the process of leaving their homes on the Panama Islands. I'm interested
Oh.
in what they're thinking right now.
Mm.
Uh, I feel like it's important to look at permaculture and places where there's, s- the cliche of farm to table projects, but that are
Mhm.
happening in places where the ecology is changing so rapidly that they're having to actually bring plants in from other places.
Oh.
Um, because you cannot expect ecologies to stay the same. So uh, I was at a place called Playa Viva in Mexico, and they had a really interesting farming project going on there. And the droughts in Mexico are so severe that they're actually having to bring in plants from the Middle East that are desert plants.
Mm.
So that's interesting. In a lot of ways, that's I think ties into a lot that we're talking about here.
Well, yeah, thank you. I'll definitely look up those people. And if anyone listening is from Panama or lives in Panama and is going through that situation, they can definitely reach out to me and I'd love to have a conversation with them. And Nora, thank you for your time today. I will link to your books. Where else can people find you if they want to learn more, engage with you?
Well, there's always the warm data work, which is wonderful and juicy and fun and rigorous. And so the warm data websites, but all you have to do is Google it. So you don't have to post any links. People can find their way. Mm.
YouTube, you're very generous with your time to have conversations with many people. So I definitely recommend for anyone who's interested to listen to other interviews that you've done. Warm Data Labs is on my list of places where I will come one day,
Yeah.
definitely. Um, and yeah, thank you very much for your time. I'm glad that we had a chance to connect. Yeah, and that's it for us
All
today.
right. Thank you.